They didn't laugh because it was funny. They laughed because they thought she'd stay on the ground. In a world where prestige wears uniforms and genius gets overlooked, a quiet teen boards a flight with more than a ticket. She carries a future the world isn't ready for. When a smug pilot mocks her budget seat, he has no idea who just stepped onto his plane, or what she's about to change forever. What happens when brilliance refuses to ask for permission? Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from, and be sure to follow, because tomorrow's story might just flip everything you thought you knew. Captain Rick Dalton didn't even try to hide his smirk. He leaned slightly toward the young gate agent, as if she had whispered something absurd. His hand hovered over the collar of his crisp uniform, adjusting it out of habit, and then he laughed. A low, dry chuckle that didn't quite echo, but still managed to slice through the ambient buzz of Gate 41. The object of his amusement stood 3 feet away. She was barely 5'5", shoulders pulled back as if trying to convince herself that posture could stand in for confidence. In her left hand she held a crumpled boarding pass like it might fall apart if she loosened her grip. The print was faded from sweat and overfolding. Andrea Burnett didn't move, didn't blink. She'd heard that kind of laugh before. Dalton gave her a once-over. Fast, but sharp. Worn sneakers, second-hand backpack with a frayed strap, jeans with one knee nearly white from washing. The kid looked like she didn't belong here. And Zone 5? He'd flown refugees from war zones who had more status than a Zone 5 ticket. He tilted his head toward the agent. Zone 5? That's the pray it still flies section, right? The agent gave a nervous laugh, more out of habit than humor. Andrea didn't. She took a quiet breath through her nose and nodded politely, the way her mother taught her to never feed the fire. But her fingers clenched tighter around the ticket. Captain Dalton's eyes flicked down, lingering on the paper like it might contaminate his vision. He stepped aside without a word, waving her through like he was doing her a favor. "Good luck," he muttered under his breath, not quite quiet enough. Andrea passed him without flinching, but her jaw clenched. Inside she was calculating. Not revenge, not anger. Just the distance between this gate and the tarmac, the seconds it would take to reach the nose of the aircraft, and the exact model of the engine currently fueling the flight to Atlanta. She'd designed a better version in her bedroom 2 years ago. At 17, Andrea Burnett had grown used to being overlooked. It was almost comforting, the way people glanced past her like she was background noise. She made a game of it sometimes, counting how long it took for someone in a room to ask if she belonged there. Today's record was 6 minutes. A woman had assumed she was waiting for someone. A man had offered to explain what boarding group meant. But the pilot's laugh wasn't background noise. It was a declaration. It reminded her of the substitute math teacher who told her robotics wasn't for kids like her. Or the judge at her first science fair who'd nodded approvingly at the white boy standing next to her and asked Andrea, "Whose project is this?" She had wanted to scream then, but she didn't. She had smiled. Then she'd walked away and started building the next thing that would make them all swallow their assumptions. Now she stepped onto the jet bridge without looking back. The floor hummed under her feet. The stale, recycled air that usually signaled disappointment, the cramped seats, the noise, the carry-on fight for space. Today it felt different. Today, something in her bones whispered this flight wasn't the destination, and was the test. Behind her, Captain Dalton turned to his first officer, a soft-spoken man named Devin Reyes, still green, still polite enough to look uncomfortable. "You see what I mean, Reyes," Dalton said, voice lowered but with no real effort to hide it. "Every damn day, these kids show up thinking a cheap ticket and a dream is enough." Reyes didn't respond. His jaw worked slightly, like he wanted to chew the words before swallowing them whole. Dalton clapped him on the back. "Just remember, the sky's not a charity, it's earned." Dalton turned and disappeared into the jet. Reyes looked after him a second longer than he should have, then followed. Back inside the cabin, Andrea found her seat rear of the plane, next to the engine. The vibrations would be louder here, the windows smaller. She liked that. She liked feeling the thrust, hearing the groan of physics holding up 200 tons of ambition. She sat down quietly, pulled a folded notebook from her backpack, and flipped to a page near the middle. It wasn't notes. It was sketches, diagrams, equations running up the margins in her tight, clean handwriting. A design for an electric turbofan engine, something smaller, quieter, a hybrid pulse with temperature-controlled core shielding that wouldn't even hit the market for another 8 years. She knew because she had read every patent application for anything even close. Andrea had spent the past 3 summers in programs she had to beg her way into, writing emails with subject lines like, "I just want to learn." She'd sat through lectures where people spoke over her, asked questions she already had the answers to, and ignored the ones she asked. She'd learned to shrink herself in the room, and then fill notebooks with ideas that could crack open the aerospace industry. But none of that showed on a boarding pass, especially not a Zone 5 boarding pass. A chime overhead announced final boarding, and the rest of the passengers filed in. Andrea pressed her forehead to the cool plastic window. She wondered if Captain Dalton would still be laughing at 35,000 feet, wondered if his voice would sound different over the intercom, all cheery and distant, when the flight reached cruising altitude. Maybe he'd say something like, "We're currently flying over the Carolinas. On your left, you'll see the same old world pretending it hasn't changed." She imagined saying that over a speaker one day. No, not imagined. Knew. She hadn't come this far for the sake of flying. It wasn't about getting to Atlanta. It was about everything that came after. The plane shook gently as it detached from the gate. Andrea felt the hum of the engine and leaned into it. She closed her eyes and thought of the workshop behind her school's gym, the one with the half-busted fan and the broken vending machine, where she'd soldered her first circuit board using a tutorial and a curling iron, where she'd failed more times than she could count, and where, 6 months ago, she'd uploaded a design to a private beta submission portal for a competition no one expected her to enter. She hadn't told anyone. Not her mom, not her physics teacher, not even her mentor from the summer STEM program, and definitely not the captain with the silver wings on his chest and rust in his eyes. As the plane rolled toward the runway, she imagined the moment her name would be read aloud from a stage, when someone would say, "Designed by Andrea Burnett." She didn't need applause, just silence, the kind that meant everyone had been wrong. The engines roared, the cabin tilted. Andrea smiled to herself as the plane lifted from the ground. For now, she was just a girl in the back row of a budget airline. But even gravity knew not to laugh too soon. Andrea had always known how to disappear in plain sight, not in a magical way, not in the superhero kind of way kids like to talk about at lunch. It was a silence that wrapped around her like an old coat, worn in, comfortable, necessary. A silence that let her blend into hallways, glide through classrooms without being noticed, and walk home with thoughts that filled every space her voice didn't. She wasn't shy, not really. She just didn't speak, unless the words were worth the breath. Her mother called it old soul energy. Said Andrea had been like that even as a baby. Never fussed unless something truly needed fixing. Never smiled just because someone said she should, but when she did smile, it was real and rare, like the sun after a week of rain. At home, things moved quietly too. Their apartment in Building B of the Fairgrove housing complex sat just off the freeway. 2nd floor, 3 rooms, paper-thin walls, and a view of the laundromat dumpster. But inside, Tracy Burnett kept it clean, kept it warm. Andrea's mother was a nurse, the kind that picked up back-to-back shifts like she was trying to outwork time itself. Most mornings, Andrea woke up to the sound of the front door clicking shut. Her mother already gone. The smell of instant coffee and cocoa butter lotion lingered in the air. Sometimes a note on the counter. "There's fruit in the fridge, don't forget your lunch." In the quiet of the kitchen, Andrea would read those notes twice, just to hold on to the feeling that someone remembered she was there. School was a blur of faces and noise. People talked, they always talked. About who was dating who wore what, who got into what school, who got suspended, who got jumped. Andrea stayed on the edges. She'd learned how not to flinch when the boys cracked jokes or when teachers called her Alexis for the third time in a week. Her actual teachers, well, they were used to the quiet girl in the back row with the half-finished mechanical pencil always in hand. They called her polite, said she was bright but needs to participate more. No one knew she was teaching herself propulsion theory from PDFs downloaded on a cracked tablet. No one saw the late nights she spent watching archived MIT lectures while stirring boxed mac and cheese. No one asked. There was one class, though, Tech Concepts and Design, an elective most kids took as a blow-off. A room full of dusty workbenches, plastic tubs of wires, broken printers stacked in the corner like a junkyard monument. That's where Andrea lived. She didn't speak much there, either, but she didn't have to. Her hands did the talking. She rebuilt a busted 3D printer using spare drone parts from the discount bin, designed a remote-controlled rover using salvaged motors and an old Xbox controller. She was the only girl in the class, and definitely the only one who didn't need a YouTube tutorial for everything. Mr. Raynor, the teacher, was an aging ex-engineer with more gray hair than patience. He'd taught for too long to pretend he was impressed easily. But every time he saw Andrea working, he stopped mid-sentence. Just watched her like someone watching a song being written in real time. One day he left a pamphlet on her desk. No words, just a tap and a nod. Future Space National Innovation Challenge. A next-gen aerospace competition for young visionaries. She didn't look at it right away. She slid it into her bag and kept soldering. That night, though, in her room, with the peeling posters and taped-up equations, she read every word. The deadline was 3 months away. Open to high school juniors and seniors. Must submit a fully rendered concept for next-generation aviation or spacecraft technology. Most kids would have thought about it, maybe done a Google search, asked their science teacher. Andrea opened a blank page on her CAD software and started drawing. She didn't ask anyone for permission. Didn't tell Mr. Raynor. Didn't tell her mom. Not because she was hiding it, but because speaking it out loud made it feel more fragile. Dreams sounded different in other people's mouths. Andrea's evenings became a pattern. Home by 4. Heat up leftovers or eat cereal. Homework by 6. By 7, she was sketching. She built a mini lab on her desk. Pieces from old toys, wires from discarded extension cords, capacitors scavenged from old VCRs neighbors threw out. She worked under the yellow buzz of a desk lamp with a faulty neck, holding it in place with a hair tie. Her fingers learned patience, precision. Her ideas learned weight, scale. Sometimes her mom would knock softly on the door, eyes puffy from a 12-hour shift. "You eat?" "Yes, Mom." "You good?" "Okay, I'm proud of you." Andrea never said thank you out loud, but she'd nod. Slow, steady, eyes locked. That was enough. The night. Long after midnight, the prototype came together. Not a real engine, of course, but a scale model of a hybrid electric pulse design with built-in temp modulation. The thrust-to-weight ratio wasn't just theoretical. She calculated it 3 different ways. It worked. She stared at it under the dim light, hands hovering as if afraid to touch it again. The silence in the room felt full, alive, like the moment right before a rocket launch. Everything still. Then, everything changes. She uploaded her design to the FutureSpace private portal, filled out the application, typed her name with her thumb shaking slightly, and clicked Submit before she could overthink it. No fanfare, no digital confetti, just a blinking message, submission received. The next morning, she deleted the confirmation email after forwarding it to herself, just in case. Weeks passed. Then, a month. She got up, went to school, took notes, tinkered with a new project, an anti-vibration suspension rig for small drones. She got her mom a new pair of shoes from a local sale using babysitting money. She watched planes fly overhead sometimes and wondered if they felt different now that she had a piece of one in her heart. And then a letter came. It wasn't fancy. White envelope, her name handwritten. She tore it open at the mailbox and read the first line 3 times. Congratulations, you have been selected as a finalist for the FutureSpace Innovation Challenge. The rest blurred. Her knees locked. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't run inside. She just stood there, clutching the paper like it might vanish, and let the words sink into her skin. She had done it, and nobody knew but her. Andrea walked up the stairs to their apartment with her head high, posture perfect, not because she needed to convince anyone, but because she finally didn't have to hide. Inside her room, she opened her notebook again, flipped past sketches, blueprints, notes. On the back page, she wrote just one line. Flight isn't about wings, it's about leaving behind the noise. And then she smiled. Andrea had never been to an airport before that week, not really. She'd seen one from a distance once on a school field trip, the kind where they packed 30 kids into a yellow bus with broken windows and said, "Look, kids, that's where people with money go on vacation." The bus never even got close to the terminal. They stopped on a side road near the fence, watched planes climb into the clouds, and left after 15 minutes because the teacher couldn't afford parking. But now she stood inside the terminal, surrounded by noise and movement and glass and light. She didn't stare the way first-timers usually did. She moved like she belonged, head level, eyes steady, backpack on both shoulders zipped tight. There was something powerful about being in the middle of a place designed for departure. Everyone going somewhere, everyone pretending they weren't scared to leave. Her plane didn't take off for another 2 hours. She'd arrived early, of course, not just because she didn't trust the city buses to run on time, but because she liked being early, liked watching things, watching people, seeing how everything worked, how families moved together, business travelers moved alone, and couples held hands like the world might split them apart if they let go. She found an empty row of chairs near gate 14 and pulled out her sketch pad. Not the one she used for school, the other one, the one with the blue cloth cover and the tiny graphite smudges on every page, the one where her dreams lived. She sketched the wing of a new design she'd been imagining the night before. Thinner, lighter, with a curved edge that could adjust mid-slight using shape memory alloys. She'd read about them in a journal online. Most engineers still didn't trust them for aircraft. Too unstable, too theoretical. Andrea didn't mind unstable. She liked the edges of science, the parts where people said, "Not yet," like a dare. As she sketched, she remembered the first time she saw the inside of a plane. It was on a screen, a science show her mom turned on when Andrea was 7. She was supposed to be doing a puzzle on the floor, but the host's voice caught her attention. And here we are, inside the cockpit of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. She had turned and stared at the controls, buttons, screens, switches. A view of the clouds like something out of a dream. The pilot wore a headset and spoke in calm bursts, as if flying through the air at 500 miles an hour was no more stressful than reading a book. Andrea had crawled closer to the TV and sat cross-legged. She didn't blink. She didn't even hear her mom ask if she wanted juice. She wasn't watching a show. She was watching her future. After that, everything changed. She begged her mom to get her books on planes from the library, made paper models and flew them off the stairwell, tried to take apart an old blender just to understand its motor, until her mom gently told her they actually needed that blender. One time in 4th grade, she asked a substitute teacher if women could be pilots. The woman smiled in that way grown-ups did when they didn't think a question needed answering. "Of course," the substitute said, "but it's very competitive, hard job. You need a lot of math." Andrea hadn't responded. She just pulled her workbook closer and started teaching herself long division 3 chapters ahead. She didn't want to be a flight attendant. Didn't want to be someone's helper. She wanted to build the planes, design them, touch the sky on her terms. By 8th grade, Andrea had memorized the names of every major aircraft engine on the market. She read safety reports like novels. Her favorite wasn't the shiny new jets or military planes with their sleek designs. It was the prototypes, the failures, the ones that almost worked. There was something beautiful in that, something honest. She liked that. Her mom noticed, of course, not right away, but eventually. One night, after Andrea had fallen asleep on the couch with an open textbook across her chest and a half-finished schematic of a propeller sketched on the back of an old receipt, Tracy stood over her and just watched. Quiet, tired, proud in a way that didn't always reach her face but sat in her eyes. She didn't wake Andrea, just pulled a blanket over her and whispered, "Fly, baby. Just fly." Now Andrea sat in the middle of Gate 14, drawing wings on paper that didn't know the weight of failure, and wondered if her mom remembered saying that. Probably not. It was one of those sentences that lived inside you longer than the person who spoke it realized. She looked up briefly, scanning the terminal. No one was watching her. Perfect. She flipped to another page. Started sketching again. This time it wasn't an engine, it was a cabin interior. She had a theory about maximizing space efficiency without sacrificing comfort. Angled seating, modular armrests, rear-facing middle seats to increase visual openness. She wasn't even sure it could be done with current regulations. But that wasn't the point. The point was to ask questions no one else was asking. She had written that in marker on a scrap of paper stuck to her bedroom mirror. Ask the question no one else wants to ask. Andrea looked at her watch. Still an hour. Her stomach growled softly. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a granola bar. Chocolate chip, slightly melted, because she'd sat on it by accident earlier. She ate it slowly, watching a little girl and her dad walk by with matching stuffed pandas in their arms. It made her think of her own dad, the memory of him a shadow more than a person. She hadn't seen him since she was 9. Not really. He'd been in and out, mostly out. Letters, when he remembered. Birthday cards with money she never spent. Tracy never said a bad word about him. She didn't need to. Andrea had eyes, and silence could tell the truth louder than anger. Still, sometimes she wondered if he'd be proud. Would he look at her designs and say, "That's my girl"? Or would he feel small in the presence of something bigger than he ever built? The thought didn't last long. Andrea pushed it aside and pulled out her phone. Opened her email. Nothing new. The last message from future space still sat unread. Not because she didn't want to see it. She'd read it already 11 times. But leaving it unread made it feel like the journey was still happening. Like something was still unfolding. She liked that. The final boarding call rang out overhead. She glanced around. Not her flight. Not yet. Andrea leaned back in the seat, pulled her hoodie up over her head and closed her eyes just long enough to breathe. She imagined the plane she'd one day build. She imagined sitting inside it. And she imagined a voice, her voice, over the intercom saying calmly, confidently, "Welcome aboard, you're flying with Andrea Burnett Aerospace today." And for the first time since stepping into the terminal, she let herself smile wide enough to show teeth. The dream was alive. It always had been. It just needed altitude. The cafeteria buzzed with sound, tray clatter, hallway echoes, bursts of laughter that didn't belong to her. Andrea sat alone at the edge table by the vending machine, its neon blue glow flickering across her open laptop. She wasn't eating. She rarely did during lunch. Food felt heavy in her stomach when her mind was working, and today her brain was sprinting. The screen in front of her displayed a blank email draft. The subject line was typed, but the body remained untouched. Subject: Entry confirmation, future space, innovation challenge. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. This was the email she had been planning to write all week. A thank you to the program director. A confirmation that she'd received the official finalist invitation. A quiet, professional way of saying, yes, I'll be there. But she couldn't send it. Not yet. She wasn't scared. At least, not of the challenge. Not of the other finalists or the judges or even the presentations. It was everything else. The cost, the flight, the hotel. The unspoken rule that these kinds of programs, elite, exclusive, polished, weren't made for girls like her. Especially not girls who had to ask for extra ketchup packets just to stretch groceries until Friday. Andrea closed the laptop and stared at the vending machine instead. She counted the rows of chips like they were problems she could solve. 10 rows, 4 columns, 40 snacks, each one overpriced and overpackaged, none of them satisfying. Behind her, chairs scraped loudly as a group of students pushed their way into the far corner. She didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. Their voices rose in that sharp, laughing tone that came from kids who knew they owned the room. They'll tell me why Shorty in chem class really thought she could out-Anson Jacob. Quiggle. She raised her hand like she invented gravity. I swear she'd be acting like she's smarter than everybody just 'cause she don't talk. Gee, always writing stuff down, like anyone cares. Andrea blinked and kept staring at the vending machine. They weren't talking about her. Not today. Probably. But it didn't matter. They'd said the same things enough times before for the words to stick like gum on her shoes. She'd heard them in hallways, in classrooms, in stairwells. They weren't always cruel, just loud, careless, words that painted over her presence with a dull gray brush. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was how teachers heard it too, and never said anything. Or worse, how they participated in subtler ways. Like when Ms. Paris in advanced physics told her, "You're smart, but sometimes you come off a little intense, Andrea. You should try smiling more when you talk." Or when Mr. Holloway had passed her over for the city STEM Expo because he didn't think she'd want to present in front of a crowd. Andrea had smiled then. Small, tight, just enough to be polite. And then she'd gone home and designed a remote power stabilizing coil that reduced energy drain in lithium batteries by 12%. But none of that mattered here. Not when the world preferred loud mediocrity over quiet brilliance. She stood up from the table, laptop tucked under one arm, and headed for the side door. Her footsteps were soft, practiced. She slipped through the noise like a shadow that didn't need permission. In the hallway outside the cafeteria, the air was cooler, calmer. Lockers lined both walls like rusted teeth, some of them dented from years of slammed doors and stray backpacks. Andrea walked with purpose toward the stairwell that led to the basement, where the shop room waited. It wasn't a classroom, not officially, just a space the school forgot. A low-ceilinged storage area with dusty workbenches, missing tiles, and a constant humming from the old fluorescent lights. But it was hers. She pushed open the door and let the silence welcome her. Inside, her project waited under a tarp. She pulled it back gently, revealing a frame of aluminum rods, 3D printed parts, and copper wiring that spiraled around the central core like a nervous system. It wasn't a plane. Not yet. It was a prototype of a propulsion system, one designed to reduce noise output while increasing efficiency during takeoff. It looked like a sculpture, a strange, beautiful, unfinished one. Andrea ran her fingers along the frame. It wasn't perfect. She still hadn't solved the issue of heat dissipation during peak load, but she was close. Closer than anyone in her school knew. Closer than most of the adults she'd met. The challenge rules required that all finalists present a theoretical model or a functioning demo. Most finalists went the theory route. Easier, safer, cleaner. Andrea had built something real. She'd done it after school, on weekends, during early mornings before class. She'd done it with borrowed tools, recycled materials, and scavenged parts from broken machines. She'd done it without funding, without a mentor on call, without a team. But there was one person who'd helped, quietly, from the sidelines. Dr. Natalie Green. She was a professor who ran a free aerospace summer program Andrea had gotten into last year after submitting a 15-page essay and a letter practically begging for a full scholarship. Andrea remembered their first meeting like it was yesterday. Dr. Green had looked at her hands, small, calloused, stained with grease, and said, "You've built things, not just studied them." Andrea had nodded. "No one teaches girls to build anymore," Dr. Green had added. "But you build anyway." The tremor reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through old messages until she found Dr. Green's number. She stared at it, thumb hovering. She hadn't told her about the competition. She'd wanted to, but part of her needed to do this on her own. Still, maybe now was the moment. Before she could press call, her phone buzzed. New message, Future Space Logistics Team. She tapped it open. "Hi, Andrea. Congratulations again on being selected. Just a reminder, finalists must confirm travel plans by Friday. Let us know if you'll need support with accommodations or flight arrangements." Andrea stared at the screen. That word felt dangerous, loaded. She knew what it meant. Support meant, do you need charity? It meant standing out even more. It meant risking the judges seeing her not as a finalist, but as a finalist with an asterisk. She hated that feeling. The feeling of being grateful for things that other kids expected as a given. She closed the message and dropped the phone into her hoodie pocket. She turned back to the prototype and started adjusting the coil. Her hands moved with practiced ease, rewiring a part that had been misaligned for days. In the silence, she worked. Not because she needed to prove anything, not even because she was going to the competition, but because this building, this fixing, was her language, her breath, her way of saying, "I belong here," without ever needing to raise her voice. Let them talk. Let them underestimate. Let them look past her. She'd come up through the cracks. And one day soon she'd fly so high they'd all have to look up just to see her. The hardest part wasn't building it. Not the wiring, not the testing, not the endless hours spent tweaking formulas and staring at simulation outputs that didn't make sense until they suddenly did. The hardest part was knowing she had no safety net, no backup, no one standing behind her to step in if something broke or short-circuited or simply didn't work. Andrea Burnett was building on faith. Faith in herself, faith in a dream no one else had the time or imagination to believe in. Her room was silent except for the rhythmic buzz of her soldering iron, which she held like a paintbrush. Sparks clicked faintly, just enough to whisper against the hum of the streetlights outside the window. It was past midnight. Most of the world was asleep. But Andrea's night had just begun. She leaned in close, the tip of her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth, eyes narrowed. She steadied the tiny resistor between tweezers, then touched the iron down. A clean connection, no stutter, no mess. She exhaled slowly and sat back, flexing her cramped fingers. 4 more wires and the new module would be complete. Her desk looked like it belonged to a scientist and an artist who'd never agreed on boundaries. Notes, sketches, tools, crumpled diagrams, energy drink cans, and a strip of paper that ran along the back wall, held up by tacks. It was a timeline, color-coded. Her plan to finish the prototype before the flight to the competition. Each day was filled with steps, tasks, milestones, and at the very end, written in black marker, takeoff. Andrea never used the word finale. That sounded too much like an ending. She preferred takeoff. Because this was just the beginning. She reached under the desk and pulled out a storage bin filled with broken parts, things that had failed or weren't compatible or simply didn't live up to the vision. She dug through it until she found the old cooling plate she'd scrapped last week, too thin, warped when heat passed through it for more than 90 seconds. But she wasn't done with it yet. She had an idea. She grabbed a small sheet of thermal paste and a different material sample, graphene-coated mesh. She pressed them together, testing the bond. She'd read somewhere that combining them with a layered ceramic substrate could reduce degradation over time. Expensive materials, things she couldn't afford. So she made her own version, pieced together from donations, eBay scraps, and a local university's recycling bin that had no idea what it had thrown away. A knock echoed softly on her door. Andrea didn't jump. She was used to that knock. It was gentle, always 3 taps, and never followed by anything unless she responded. "Come in," she said, not looking up from the mesh. Her mom pushed the door open and stepped in slowly, already wearing her uniform, scrubs, pale blue, a name tag clipped to the collar. Andrea glanced at the time, 12:41. And Tracy always took the overnight shift on Thursdays. "You still at it?" her mom said, smiling in that tired way that meant she wasn't going to lecture her. "Not tonight." "Almost done with the core unit," Andrea said, wiping her hands on her hoodie. "Got a new idea for cooling. Might actually work." Tracy crossed the room and looked over her shoulder. She didn't understand all of it, not the physics, not the math. But she understood the girl building it, understood that fire in her daughter's eyes better than any schematic. "Don't forget to sleep," she said, reaching out to gently brush Andrea's hair back. "Dreams are made of rest, too." "I will," Andrea lied, not because she wanted to, but because she needed her mother to feel okay about leaving. Tracy paused, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I almost forgot," she said, handing it to Andrea. "Came in the mail today. Had your name on it." Andrea opened it, blinking as her eyes scanned the header. "Burnett, Andrea, travel grant confirmation." Her heart kicked once, hard. "Your teacher must have sent in your name for consideration," her mom said. "Looks like they're covering your hotel. Partial flight reimbursement, too." Andrea stared at the words, then looked up. "You didn't do this?" Tracy shook her head. "Wish I could say I did." Andrea bit the inside of her cheek. It must have been Dr. Green. She had mentioned something about trying to connect finalists with funding options. Andrea hadn't followed up, hadn't dared ask. She set the paper down on the desk slowly, afraid that if she touched it too hard it might disappear. Her mom smiled. "Looks like you're going to that competition, baby." Andrea didn't speak. Her throat was thick. Instead, she reached over and hugged her mom around the waist, quick but firm. Tracy kissed the top of her head. "Make them see you, Andrea. All of you." When the door clicked shut again, Andrea sat in the silence and stared at the paper for another full minute. Then she turned back to her project with a surge of energy she didn't know she still had. She reached for the base panel of the prototype and began fitting the module into place. Her hands moved faster now with a certainty that felt new. She adjusted the microprocessor, reconnected the capacitors, and began running diagnostics on her tablet. One by one, The numbers lined up. When the calibration pinged green, she didn't cheer. She didn't even smile. She just nodded to herself, steady and calm, and wrote one new word at the bottom of her timeline, under takeoff. Proof. She was going to walk into that room full of clean suits, shiny shoes, and prep school accents, and they were going to see her work. Not her shoes, not her zip-up hoodie, not her last name or her district, or the way she never raised her hand in class. They were going to see her, and there wouldn't be a single thing they could say to deny what she'd built. She leaned back, hands behind her head, and stared at the machine, glowing faintly in front of her. It didn't look like much, but it would change everything. Andrea sat perfectly still, even though her foot wanted to bounce, her hand wanted to scribble, and her brain had already run 3 simulations in her head that morning. Her prototype was secured inside a reinforced black case tucked beneath her seat, the kind musicians used for fragile instruments. A few people had glanced at it when she first walked in, curious, then dismissive. They probably thought it was a camera kit, or maybe something heavy but unimportant. She sat near gate 14, headphones in but nothing playing. The soft rubber of the earbuds gave her an excuse not to talk, an easy way to listen without being invited into conversations. Around her, travelers shuffled by in waves, a mother arguing softly with a toddler who wanted candy at 8 in the morning, a man in a wrinkled blazer yelling into his AirPods, 2 students, maybe college kids, comparing boarding passes like they were puzzle pieces. Andrea stared straight ahead, not at the people, at the window, at the planes. A runaway stretched in the distance, planes lined up like waiting horses, engines humming, noses pointed toward the unknown. She watched one lift slowly into the air. The ascent was never as fast as it looked on TV. It was gradual, stubborn, like the earth was reluctant to let go. Her mind drifted, as it always did, to the math behind it, angle of attack, drag coefficients, thrust ratios, that silent ballet of pressure and lift, invisible to the eye but undeniable in force. Everything she loved lived inside that space. Between the moment wheels left concrete and the moment silence settled into altitude. A gate agent called out for a flight to Baltimore. Andrea checked the time. 40 minutes until boarding. She reached down and adjusted the strap on her case, fingers brushing the cold metal latch for the 10th time. A pair of black dress shoes came into her line of sight. She didn't look up at first. She recognized the shoes. They were military shine, the kind that didn't scuff, didn't bend, the kind of shoes that had rules about them. "You flying with Ascend Air?" the voice asked. A man's voice, confident, crisp. Andrea looked up slowly. The pilot stood in front of her, arms crossed, a slight smirk pulling at the edge of his mouth. Captain Rick Dalton. His badge caught the light as he tilted slightly, just enough to invade the space without technically crossing any line. "Yes," Andrea said. Her voice came out clear, neutral, not meek, not sharp. A middle tone she had mastered over years of being underestimated. Dalton glanced at the black case by her feet. "Instrument?" he asked. "No." He waited. She didn't elaborate. His smile tightened. "Zone 5, he said, glancing at the gate display. "Always an adventure." Andrea said nothing. "I used to fly that route," he added, rocking slightly on his heels like a man talking just to fill the silence. "Back before they cut costs so much. You know how they squeeze these things now. Barely any cabin pressure difference from a soda can." Andrea nodded once, expression unreadable. Dalton crouched slightly, pretending to adjust his cuff, but really just looking at her up close. "You look young," he said. "First time flying alone?" "No," she said. He chuckled. "Well," he said, standing again, "just don't expect much leg room, or dignity." Andrea's hands rested in her lap, still. She didn't reach for her phone. Didn't check her watch. She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I'm not here for legroom," she said. He paused. Something about her tone hit a nerve. "Oh?" he said. She didn't answer. Dalton sniffed, glanced at her bag again, then straightened his uniform jacket. He looked toward the gate agents, then back at her. "You'll want to board early if you're hauling something heavy. Zone 5 usually means fighting for overhead space." "Got it," she said. He lingered a second longer, like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the right insult that wouldn't make him look obvious. Then he walked away. Andrea's hands clenched slowly, then released. She counted to 5. Then opened her phone. No new messages, no updates. She scrolled through her email, anyway, landing on the one from the competition organizer. "Please arrive at Concourse C by 3:45 p.m. local time tomorrow for check-in. Presenters will be given access to the exhibit hall for final setup." She zoomed in on the map. The hall was in a private wing of the convention center attached to the hotel. Her reservation was already confirmed. She'd paid the difference out of pocket, well out of the money she'd saved tutoring 2 middle schoolers in algebra for a month straight. Andrea leaned back, closed her eyes, and breathed through her nose. She thought of the coil module inside her case, thought of the wiring she triple-checked last night, thought of how the prototype had sparked to life when she tested it. Quiet, efficient, elegant. It wasn't flashy. It didn't glow or buzz or make sounds designed to impress judges. It worked. That was the difference. Too many people wanted performance to be loud. Andrea built things that whispered. Boarding began early. Zone 1. Then Zone 2. People formed lines like clockwork, jostling for space even though everyone would end up in the same air, going to the same place. Andrea waited until they called her group. Zone 5. She moved forward slowly, case in hand, eyes straight ahead. The gate agent barely glanced at her ticket before scanning it with a tired beep. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the air shifted. Cooler, sterile. The hum of machinery louder now, familiar. Each step toward the plane was a step closer to something she had no name for. Not just a destination, not just a competition. It felt like standing at the edge of something she had spent years trying to reach. Andrea reached the plane's entrance and paused. Captain Dalton stood just inside the door, greeting passengers with the hollow smile of a man who knew he was being watched. He saw her. Their eyes met again. His smile flickered, just a twitch. Then it faded. She walked past him without a word, and he didn't say a thing either. She took her seat. Row 31, window, and stowed the case beneath the one in front of her. It fit perfectly. As the engine started to hum and the safety announcements droned on, Andrea rested her head against the cold pane of glass. She watched the runway come into view, stretched long and wide like a question waiting to be answered. She didn't know what the judges would say, didn't know if anyone would understand what she'd built or why she built it the way she did, but she knew this. She'd arrive. She'd stand in that room, and they would see her. Not because she demanded it, but because it would be impossible not to. The plane pushed back from the gate. Andrea closed her eyes, not in fear, not in fatigue, but in preparation. The world was finally moving with her. The air in the cabin had that early morning chill, the kind that clung to your skin just enough to remind you you weren't home. Andrea sat tucked into her window seat, knees drawn slightly inward to avoid brushing against the stranger in the aisle spot. She hadn't spoken since boarding. She didn't need to. She had her case secure at her feet, the hum of the aircraft beneath her, and enough quiet to let her think. Until she heard his voice again. "Zone 5, Captain Dalton said from somewhere down the aisle, not loud but not quiet either, just loud enough to carry. He wasn't talking to her directly, not at first. He was standing near the cockpit, chatting with a flight attendant and another passenger in business attire, a man with a neck pillow already slung around his shoulders. "Tell me how that section always manages to delay boarding," Dalton said. "Half the time they're dragging 3 bags and a bad attitude." The businessman laughed politely. The attendant didn't respond. Andrea kept her eyes forward, but her jaw locked. She had no way of knowing if he was talking about her. But it didn't matter. The comment, the tone, it was meant to be heard. A flare sent out just far enough to singe. She reached down and double-checked the straps on her case. Tight, secure, unbothered, or at least pretending to be. Then the pilot's voice rang out again, this time from the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Rick Dalton. We'll be heading southbound today, cruising at 36,000 feet. Weather looks clear. If you're lucky enough to have a window seat, enjoy the view. If not, maybe next time you'll board earlier." Another chuckle from the man in business class. Andrea's face remained still. Her fingers curled slowly into the sleeves of her hoodie. Let them talk. The plane taxied along the runway, engines rumbling beneath her. It felt like a heartbeat, steady and rising. The moment the wheels left the ground, Andrea leaned into the gentle pressure, letting it carry her upward. She watched the buildings shrink, the cars become toys, the sky widen like a curtain pulled back. She didn't care if Dalton flew the plane with his nose in the air and ego in the clouds. She was still moving. 2 hours in, the beverage cart rolled by. The attendant was different now. A woman named Sophia, with a warm smile and tired eyes. "Anything to drink, hun?" "Just water, thank you," Andrea said. Sophia handed her a small cup and a napkin. "Love your case. Music?" Andrea hesitated. "No. Engineering prototype." The woman's eyebrows lifted. "That's so?" Andrea nodded. "Finalist in the Future Space Challenge." "Well, shoot," Sophia said, offering a grin that felt real. "Don't let this old plane be the last one you touch." Andrea smiled, just barely. Behind them, the curtain to first class rustled. Dalton emerged, strolling through the aisle with the slow pace of someone who liked being noticed. He paused when he saw Andrea. She felt it, his presence stopping beside her row, his gaze like a flicker on her cheek. "What's in the case?" he asked casually, as if it were small talk. Andrea looked up at him. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence stretch, let him hear the sound of engines, the whisper of altitude. Then she said, "Just something built to fly better than this." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "Built it yourself?" "Yes." He scoffed. "That's ambitious." Andrea tilted her head slightly. "So, was putting wings on metal tubes once?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know, the hardest thing about flight isn't lift. It's proving you belong in the air." She met his gaze without flinching. "I already know I do." Dalton's mouth tightened. He glanced at the case again, then gave a nod that was too sharp to be friendly. "Good luck, then." He turned and walked away. Andrea didn't watch him go. She stared out the window. The clouds rolled past, soft and heavy and distant. The rest of the flight was quiet. When they landed, the disembark was slow and crowded. Andrea waited, letting others push forward. No rush. No need. As she stepped off the jet bridge and into the terminal, her phone buzzed. New message from Natalie Green. "We'll be waiting by the escalators near baggage claim. Proud of you already." Andrea exhaled, the air leaving her chest in a way she hadn't realized she'd been holding in for hours. She walked through the terminal, pulling her case behind her. Her shoes clicked softly against the floor. Nobody stopped her. Nobody stared. But she noticed something. Just ahead, Captain Dalton stood with a small group of crew members, luggage by his side. He saw her. This time, she didn't look away. He nodded once, a real nod, Small, not condescending, not mocking. Andrea didn't nod back. She walked past him without breaking stride. Some people earned their wings from years in the sky. Others were born with them, even if nobody noticed until they took off. The hotel lobby shimmered with polished floors, gold-plated signage, and travelers who didn't look like they'd ever seen a late rent notice in their lives. Andrea stepped inside, her prototype case in hand, hoodie zipped to her neck. She glanced around, clocking everything in one smooth sweep. The front desk with 2 attendants smiling too hard, the row of minimalist couches, the elevator with the mirrored door that smelled like lemon polish, and high expectations. She didn't look out of place, but she felt like she might as well be wearing a sign that said, "First Timer." As she moved toward the elevator, a woman's voice called from near the concierge counter. "Andrea?" Andrea turned to find a woman in a gray pantsuit waving, tall, elegant, with locks pulled into a low bun and eyes that didn't blink as much as they observed. Natalie Green. Andrea approached slowly, her grip tightening on the handle of her case. Dr. Green smiled. Not wide, not flashy, just enough to feel like safety. "You made it," she said. "On time, of course." Andrea nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Natalie stepped closer and motioned toward the elevators. "Come, I've got something to show you before check-in." Andrea followed her without asking why. They entered the elevator, the doors whispering closed behind them. As they rose, Andrea could feel the buzz in the air. Not nerves exactly, but something electric. A shift. They exited on the 12th floor, walked past a series of closed doors, and stopped at a suite near the end of the hallway. Natalie swiped a keycard. Inside, the suite was bright and open, a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed off the city skyline. But Andrea barely noticed that, because on the table near the couch there were 2 other prototype cases and 3 name badges. Andrea stepped closer. She saw hers. Andrea Burnett, Future Space finalist. Next to it, Caleb Tran and Layla Mahat. Dr. Green moved beside her. "You're not the only underdog," she said softly. "But you might be the one who changes the game." Andrea swallowed hard. "I didn't know you were here." "I'm not officially on the judging panel," Natalie said. "But I'm observing, advising, and pushing from the shadows." Andrea glanced down at her case. "I don't need favors." Natalie's voice was firm. "Good, because I don't give them. I just opened the door. Walking through it? That's on you." Andrea nodded. Natalie leaned in slightly. "You ready for them to look at you like you don't belong?" "I'm used to it." "And are you ready to make them regret it?" Andrea's eyes flashed. "Always." They left the suite shortly after and made their way down to the main hall, where the competition registration was already underway. Kids and teens moved in clusters, many flanked by parents, teachers, mentors in suits. Andrea kept her shoulders square, her case steady and her mouth closed. She didn't need an entourage. She had a machine that worked. She reached the check-in desk. "Name?" the volunteer asked. Andrea placed her badge face up. "Andrea Burnett." The woman checked her list. "Booth 17B. Setup begins at 6. Orientation at 7:30. Sharp." Andrea thanked her, took her packet, and stepped aside. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Dr. Green again. "Get some food. Rest. Tonight will be chaos." Andrea glanced toward the long hallway that led to the exhibit hall. "Can I see it now?" Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Of course you want to." They walked. The doors to the hall were closed, but one had been propped slightly open for setup crews. Andrea slipped in behind a group of volunteers carrying signage. The space was enormous. Rows of tables already marked with name cards and flags. Electrical outlets lined the floors. Banners fluttered overhead with the Future Space logo, a stylized planet, half in shadow, half in light. She found booth 17B. The nameplate was there, just as promised. Andrea set her case on the table and opened it slowly, reverently. The prototype gleamed under the overhead lights. Compact, precise, balanced. She began attaching the base mount and opening the fold-out power hub for demo mode. As her hands worked, the buzz of voices grew louder. Others were filing in. That's when she heard it. "Don't worry, it's not like any of these kids are going to out-design you." The voice was loud, confident. A boy with gelled hair and a future space blazer walked past her booth. Caleb Tran. She recognized him from last year's competition article. His dad ran a tech firm in Seattle. She didn't look up, just kept adjusting the coil alignment. But his voice carried again. "Zone 5 energy," he said, laughing to someone beside him. "Budget brain." Andrea's hand froze. She didn't look at him. She pressed a single button on her power module and watched the indicator glow green. The prototype hummed. Not loud, not flashy, just perfect. She looked up and caught Caleb's eyes. She didn't smile. Nick didn't nod. Just said, "When it works, it doesn't need to be loud." He blinked, then turned away. By the time the orientation started, the room was packed. Dozens of kids, mentors, a panel of judges at the front stage. A spotlight on a woman in a red suit who introduced herself as the program director. "Welcome to the Future Space National Innovation Challenge," she said. "This is where the sky stops being the limit." Andrea barely heard the rest. Her heart thudded with something unfamiliar. Not fear. Readiness. Tomorrow she would present. Tonight she would test. As the orientation wrapped and people dispersed, Natalie Green found her again near the back exit. "You good?" she asked. Andrea nodded. "I'm ready." Natalie tilted her head. "You weren't invited to sit at the table. I brought my own." The two shared a look, quiet understanding, sharp and calm. Then thunder rolled outside. A sudden downpour rattled the roof of the convention hall. Andrea smiled slightly. She'd always loved storms, especially when they cleared the air. Andrea stood behind her booth, hands steady on the edges of the table, eyes scanning the room as sunlight filtered through the high arched windows of the convention hall. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside, a different kind of electricity filled the air. Nervous energy, quiet competitiveness, expectation so thick it was almost visible. Across the exhibit floor, booths gleamed with glossy models, spinning displays, interactive screens. Judges moved in pairs, clipboards in hand, sharp eyes behind reading glasses and pressed suits. Her prototype didn't shine. It didn't move or light up with color-changing LEDs. It just sat there, coiled and compact, silent and exact. Every angle calculated, every material tested under stress simulations she ran at 3 a.m. on a second-hand laptop. She could hear other finalists pitching. "My model's a fusion concept designed for Mars atmospheric conditions. Integrated biofeedback for pilot reflex synchronization. Uses ion propulsion, but scaled for regional commutes." Andrea didn't speak unless asked. That was her rhythm. No extra words, no fluff. She glanced toward booth 14, where Caleb Tran stood, surrounded by 2 judges and a small camera crew, his voice polished and theatrical. "We've partnered with a startup in Palo Alto to begin early-stage prototype production." The judges nodded, wrote something, smiled. Andrea adjusted her model slightly, not for show, but to align the light just right on the exposed pressure vent. She had 10 minutes until her assigned panel would arrive, 10 minutes until it would be her turn. Then her phone buzzed. A single message. "Step outside, immediately, bring the case." Andrea stared at it. Her heart ticked faster. She didn't recognize the number, no name, no previous text, but something about it felt intentional. Not like spam, not random. She looked up, scanned the room. Everyone was too absorbed in their own booths to notice her hesitate. She reached down, clicked the case shut, and lifted it by the handle. And then, without a word to anyone, she walked off the floor. The hall doors closed behind her with a whisper. She followed the signage past the hotel lobby, through the glass doors that led to the rear tarmac lot, normally used for service vehicles and private shuttles. That's when she saw it. A sleek, midnight black private jet, smaller than a commercial plane but twice as striking. Its body shimmered with a matte finish, the kind that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. It didn't belong to the hotel. It didn't even look like it belonged to the city. Andrea stopped walking, and then her breath caught. Painted across the side of the aircraft, just beneath the cockpit window, were 7 white letters. "Burn it." Andrea blinked. Once. No mistake. Her name. In all caps, sharp serif lettering, like it belonged there. A man approached from the aircraft's boarding steps. Tall, smooth brown suit, a bald head that caught the sun, and a presence that made everything around him seem like background noise. "Elijah Monroe," he said, extending a hand. "I've been following you for longer than you know." Andrea didn't shake his hand, not out of rudeness, but because her grip had gone slack from disbelief. "What is this?" she asked. "It's not a trick," Elijah said, voice calm. "I read your proposal. Found it before it made it to the judges. Quiet genius is easy to miss, unless you're looking for it." "I was looking." Andrea's eyes narrowed slightly. "You hacked the submission portal?" He smiled. "Let's call it preview access. I wanted to meet the girl who redesigned aviation cooling systems without a lab, a budget, or an ounce of applause." Andrea gripped the handle of her case tighter. "You're not with Future Space?" "No," he said. "I'm beyond Future Space. I own 5 companies, 3 of them in aerospace. And I've been looking for people who don't just improve the future, they build it from scratch." She blinked, unsure whether to step forward or run. "I don't want to steal your work," he added. "You'll still present today. You'll still win, because what you've made is undeniable. But after that, I want to fund you. Sponsor your full build. Give you a team, equipment, patents, you name it." Andrea stared at him, mind spinning. "Find me? Because they won't see you," Elijah said. "Not at first, not the way I do. They'll see a girl from nowhere with a backpack full of parts. But I see flight. I see silence. I see someone who doesn't wait for permission." Behind them, another gust of wind stirred dust along the tarmac. Somewhere in the sky above, a commercial plane passed with a distant roar. Andrea's eyes drifted back to the jet. Her name. Still there. Still unreal. "You had it painted?" she asked. "Vinyl wrap," Elijah said. "For now." Andrea exhaled slowly. The idea settled into her chest like something old finally coming home. He turned toward the steps. "Take a look inside before you go back. Just a peek. This is what's waiting when you stop asking for a seat at their table and start building your own runway." She didn't move at first. Then she stepped forward. The stairs groaned slightly under her weight. The cabin door was open. Inside, the jet was spotless, not just expensive, intentional. Every panel streamlined, custom seating, reinforced control dash. Even the lighting seemed to obey silence. On a leather seat near the back sat a folder. Andrea picked it up. Inside, a signed letter of intent, a check with her name on it, and a handwritten note. "This is not your peak, this is your beginning." She stared at it for a long time. Then she stepped back outside. Elijah was already walking toward a car. She called out, "Why show me this now?" He turned, hand on the door. "Because the world already doubts you. I just needed you to stop doubting yourself." Andrea stood there, wind brushing the edges of her hoodie, case in hand, pulse steady. Then she turned and walked back to the convention hall. No fear, no hesitation. The doors opened wide as she entered, and for the first time it felt like they were opening for her. The lights inside the convention hall seemed brighter when Andrea returned. Not harsh, not blinding, but purposeful, focused, like stage lights waiting on a performer. She walked through the side door with her case in hand, and something else she hadn't carried before. Not confidence, not pride. Something quieter, like altitude. Like air thinning around her lungs. Not from fear, but from finally reaching a height she wasn't supposed to survive. She passed rows of finalists mid-pitch, judges leaning in with skeptical eyes and pens hovering above clipboards. Someone behind her whispered, "There she is." But Andrea didn't turn. She moved straight to booth 17B. Natalie Green was waiting. "I wondered where you went," Natalie said, eyes searching Andrea's face. "I had to see something," Andrea replied, setting her case gently on the table. Natalie raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" Andrea looked down at her prototype. The latches clicked as she opened it. The coil caught the light, pulsing faintly from its overnight test run. She adjusted the display base, fingers moving with care, precision, certainty. "I'm ready," she said. Natalie gave a short nod, but something about the way she looked at Andrea changed in that moment. Not pity, not protection. Respect. The kind that didn't need applause. The judges reached her booth 10 minutes later. There were 3 of them, Dr. Lowenstein from MIT, Professor Alvarez from Caltech, and someone new Andrea hadn't seen on the list. A sharply dressed black man in his early 40s with a subtle accent and eyes that missed nothing. His name tag read, Amari Jones, Observer Independent Engineering Consultant. Andrea's mouth twitched once. She said nothing. The outdoor show. Dr. Lowenstein began first. "Ms. Burnett, walk us through your submission." Andrea spoke calmly, evenly. "My design reimagines traditional turbine cooling systems. Instead of relying solely on metallic fins or internal flow ducts, I used a mesh-layered graphene composite paired with a phase change material in microcapsules. This allows better thermal regulation without adding bulk." Alvarez raised his eyebrows. "And that system works under variable RPMs." Andrea nodded. "I ran a range of simulations. There's a brief latency under 7,000 RPM, but above that it self-stabilizes. I brought real-time data if you'd like to see." She pulled out a small tablet, tapped the screen, and showed the spike chart. Clean lines. No thermal cliffs, no stress drops. Omeri spoke for the first time. "What made you use microcapsules instead of open matrix cooling?" Andrea turned to him, calm. "Because they hold heat longer. I wasn't trying to cool instantly, I was trying to delay failure." He blinked. "Smart," he said quietly. Lowenstein scribbled something. Alvarez leaned in, squinting at the prototype's inner vent. "And you built this alone?" she asked. Andrea nodded. "Recycled parts. I had some help with a 3D printer from a community lab, but the concept's mine." "Where'd you learn this?" Lowenstein asked. "It's not in any standard curriculum." Andrea shrugged slightly. "Read enough accident reports, you start to see where the systems fail. I just reversed the problem." The judges exchanged glances, not disbelief, something closer to interest. "And what would you do with funding?" Alvarez asked. "Build version 2, improve latency, miniaturize the control module, apply for a provisional patent." Amari smiled, just a little. "You already thought that far ahead." Andrea looked him square in the eye. "I never had the luxury not to." That silence afterward wasn't awkward, it was respect settling in. They thanked her, moved on to the next booth. Andrea didn't sit, didn't breathe too deeply, just watched them walk away. Natalie came up behind her. "Whatever happened out there," she said, nodding toward the exit. "It shows." Andrea didn't answer. She didn't have to. That afternoon blurred. Presentations wrapped. Booths were packed up. Finalists sat in tight rows for the award ceremony, while judges conferred behind closed doors. Caleb Tran sat one row ahead of her, laughing under his breath. "I had them from the first slide," he whispered to his friend. Andrea ignored him. Then the stage lights dimmed. The director stepped up to the mic, wearing a crimson blouse and a wide grin. "Before we announce this year's winner," she said, "we want to recognize the top 3 submissions that showed not just innovation, but boldness." Andrea felt her stomach tighten. In third place, Layla Mahad for her biosensored drone for post-disaster zones. Applause. Whistles. Layla beamed as she walked across the stage. In second place, Caleb Tran for his autonomous short-range hovercraft. More applause. Caleb's smirk widened as he stepped up, raising one fist in the air. And finally, the director paused. Andrea felt her heartbeat shift into her ears. "Our first-place award for engineering innovation and breakthrough design goes to someone who worked alone, without a lab, without sponsorship, and still managed to create a system that, frankly, stunned our judges." Andrea's breath caught. This year's future space champion, Andrea Burnett. For a second, she didn't move. Not out of shock, but stillness. Then, slowly, Andrea rose from her chair. The applause around her rose in waves. Caleb didn't turn. He stared at the stage, unmoving, lips pressed flat. Andrea walked forward. She didn't cry. She didn't stumble. She didn't raise her arms. She just climbed the steps, accepted the plaque, and looked out at the crowd with the calm of someone who'd already seen this moment before it happened. Because she had. She'd seen it 1,000 times in her head. She just had to build it herself. The flash of cameras, the firm handshake from the director, the feel of the award in her hands, it all washed over her like wind through an open cockpit. Later, when the crowd thinned and her prototype had been gently loaded into a padded crate, Andrea stood outside the convention center alone. She pulled out her phone, opened the message from earlier. Deal with it. Step outside, immediately, bring the case. She smiled and saved the number this time. She called it altitude. The sun had just begun to stretch its fingers over the city's skyline when Andrea stood at the edge of the private airstrip again, her hoodie hood pulled low, prototype case in hand. The air smelled clean, crisp, like the start of something. No storm this time, just stillness, peace, and motion waiting in silence. She hadn't slept much. After the award ceremony, reporters had swarmed her, cameras clicking, microphones shoved in her face. How does it feel to win? What are your future plans? What's next for Andrea Burnett? She'd answered quietly, clearly. But not everything. Some things didn't need to be spoken. Some things were meant to be felt. Now, as she watched the black jet taxi toward her, nose gleaming in the golden light, she felt the shift. Not outside, but inside. A sensation she could only compare to when a plane lifts off the ground and your body realizes, I'm not touching anything anymore, but I'm still moving. Elijah Monroe stepped down from the jet before it fully stopped. He didn't smile this time. He just nodded, like two engineers reviewing a blueprint that finally clicked into place. You ready? He asked. Andrea lifted her prototype case and walked toward the steps. You still want it? He raised an eyebrow. I want you. The prototype is proof, but the pilot, that's the future. Andrea stepped past him, climbing the stairs with the ease of someone who belonged in the sky. The interior of the jet hadn't changed. Still sleek, still precise. But this time, she wasn't looking around in awe. She was memorizing it. Because one day, she wouldn't be the passenger. She'd be the designer, the director, the decision. They took off, smooth and fast. Elijah let her sit in the jump seat just behind the pilot's cabin. The captain, a black woman named Rochelle, glanced back once and winked. "She's got the look," Rochelle said, voice calm through her headset. "Built for the air." Andrea smiled, barely, the way she always did. They flew north. Short hop to a testing facility Elijah had acquired on the edge of the desert, a former military site turned private engineering base. When they landed, Andrea stepped out to find rows of hangars, an open runway, and a scattering of engineers already waiting. Elijah led her to Hangar 4. Inside, a team was clustered around a stripped-down fuselage mounted on a scaffold. It was beautiful in a raw way. Exposed wiring, skeletal structure, open panels that dared anyone to fix them. "This," Elijah said, "is version 2. Andrea's breath hitched. He turned to her. "We want you to lead the team. Refine the cooling, scale the design for mid-range commercial flight. You name your salary, your team, your role. But your title is already chosen." She waited. He pulled a badge from his coat and handed it to her. "Andrea Burnett, Chief Aeronautics Innovator, Monroe Flight Systems." She stared at the lettering, simple, direct, real. "I'm 17, she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You're Andrea," he said. "That's more than enough." She walked toward the fuselage. The others watched her, not with doubt, not with that prove-yourself stare she'd known her whole life. They looked at her like she was already in command. And maybe she was. Andrea set her case down and opened it. Carefully lifted the prototype out, hands steady, and began explaining the coil to the lead mechanic. He followed her every word. By noon, she was drawing on a whiteboard with 2 engineers beside her, laying out the new fluid containment model for heat redistribution. By 2, she was overseeing a stress test on the pressure unit she'd helped design only 2 months earlier in a basement. By sunset, she stood outside the hangar, grease on her sleeves, wind in her face, and something blooming in her chest that no award could ever match. A future. Not a wish, not a hope. A future she was actively building. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. "They showed you on the news. You looked calm. Your grandmother would have cried watching that." Andrea smiled. She typed back. "Tell Grandma she built this with me, piece by piece." A pause. Then another message came through. "Love, come home soon, but only after you finish changing the world." Andrea stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she turned her eyes back to the jet in front of her, the one she would help finish, the one that would carry her work, her name, her legacy into the sky. And that's when she saw it. Just beneath the cockpit window, someone had changed the name on the fuselage. Andrea Burnett, Engineer in Command. Not passenger, not guest, not finalist. Engineer in command. She didn't cry. She didn't make speeches. She didn't even speak. She just stood there, wind brushing the curls from her forehead, her hands relaxed at her sides, as if her entire life had been building toward this one quiet, soaring moment. And then she walked forward, not to get permission, but to take her place, where the air is thin, where silence flies louder than sound, where girls like her were never meant to be, until she showed them how.